Okay.
Use that
Stay
heat.
straight ahead.
Blam!
Let's go.
Dead.
Okay.
All right, this is part 2 to the armor guide. And for this one, I intend to still stay away from strategy for the moment, and we're going to talk about more details about the hardware. We just want to understand the capabilities and the weaknesses of our equipment before we start talking about strategy in future episodes. So let's go. So disclaimers, this data was gathered as of squad version 8.0.2. Who knows how all of this will become irrelevant as they release future patches and versions. Also note that all of this data was gathered on a dedicated server running vanilla squad. This is not locally hosted. I'm not using Jensen's range because we all know penetration values can be very different. And also all vehicles that are being shot at were spawned facing directly north, south, east, west because there was a bug tied to that as well. This should be all good data. So if you ask people, well, what are the important details about a tank, you'll get a lot of different opinions on it. So here are my opinions on it. Most important things would be, first of all, the ammo rack location. Next would be faster reload speeds, which we already talked about in the previous episode. Next would be the armor itself, like is it thicker armor, sharper angles for more bounces, does it have layered armor, things of that nature. And then lastly, the aiming difficulty. How fast is the turret on that tank? What are the complexities with the reticle that it has? What are its ranging abilities? All of these things are going to affect you either surviving a fight or more quickly winning a fight. So that's why I would say these are all kind of the most critical details to me. Other notable differences between the tanks would be things like their height, the differences in speed and torque on the tanks, some of the command seat differences, whether or not they've got ATGMs, their ammo capacity. All of these things may do things like increase your endurance in the field or give you a little more utility. You can get from point A to point B quicker, things of that nature. But I don't really think any of these are going to change whether or not you're winning fights. The ammo rack location is at the top of my list because it changes a fight from being won or lost in 4 or 5 shots to being won or lost in 2 shots. The easier it is to hit that rack, the worse off you are. And of course, I'm looking at you, Leopard, because it is horrible. The ammo rack location on that vehicle is unfortunate because it takes one of the best tanks that are out there and makes it one of the worst because it's so easy to die in 2 shots. If you can get hull down in this thing, it is a fantastic tank. But if you can't, you are likely better off in every other tank, with the exception of maybe the T-62. Let's talk about ATGMs and how they damage tanks. In my opinion, they can be broken down into these 5 groups that are here. The numbers that you'll see are going to represent the penetration, the damage, the style of ATGM it is, and the guidance mode. So if we look at the first group here, this is the one I want to highlight the most, is going to be the TOW, the HJ8 and the F2 Milan. These guys are serious. If they're on the field, they pose a serious threat. Vehicles that run them include the Bradley, the TOW Humvee, the TOW MATV, and the CSK 131. Those are your biggest threats because that ATGM can pin ammo rack from most any angle, and it does serious damage. It's got great penetration value as well. So watch out for those. They're some of your number 1 threats if they're on the field, especially the Bradley, since it is rapid fire. You may notice that the Cornet has pretty much identical numbers. It's just beam guided, but there is a difference with it. It's got fewer angles that it can actually rack a tank from. It seems like the Russian ATGMs, although even if they have great pin value, they don't go very far into the tank. And so the only way the Cornet can actually rack the tank is if you're hitting it from the side. If your ammo rack is right against the side of the tank, the only way it can get to it is if you're hitting it from that side. So just be aware you have much fewer angles to rack when you're using some of these Russian ATGMs. However, the BMP-2M is still a massive threat because, in fact, it's the biggest threat on the field because it's got 4 rapid fire Cornets, which is crazy. The amount of damage that can do with the pin value it has is absurd. So watch out for it. And the Samir Cornet, do not sleep on it either. It can do, just like the TOW MATVs and such, it can do massive damage. In the third group there with the Malietka and the HJ73, I want to give special notice there to the ZBL-08. Although these things are lower pin, they still carry massive damage, and the ZBL from the Chinese can rapid fire the 2 that it has. And so again, it is capable of 2-shotting a tank And lastly, you can put all of the cannon-fired ATGMs pretty much together there with the Reflex, the Bastion, APS. They're all generally the same. 500 pin and lower damage, 1163 damage that they can do. They're heat-based, and they're all beam-guided. And we're going to talk a little more about those. They're low risk to your tank in the sense that they can't rack you from many angles with these, and they carry lower damage. So it's the lowest of these threats. If you recall from the previous video, layered armor will serve to reduce the incoming damage. And with ATGMs, it is very effective at reducing damage. So much so that in some cases, on some tanks, when you shoot through a section where there's layered armor and the tracks, you're going to see that 1800 get reduced all the way down to 1300 damage in some cases. That's a reduction of 500 damage to your hull. So let's say you turn the corner of a road and now suddenly you see 200 meters away, you're staring straight at a Samir Cornet who's lining you up and about to fire. The best thing you could do is to just get your cannon faced in that direction and pop smoke instantly. Keep in mind, if you remember from the previous ATGM videos, if you've watched those canister smokes that vehicles pop will neutralize those incoming ATGMs. If you can pop that smoke and get it out there, it sends it pretty far out. It is a very good deterrent to just end that outright. But the gunner has to have that in his mind and know to instantly switch and instantly pop. And likewise, when the driver sees this, he needs to push the target immediately. You're pushing through, you're not running from this, you're going to push them. The goal is you want to get within 100 meters. Once you get within 100 meters, that's inside their men arm range, and they are helpless as far as ATGMs go. So any kind of IFV, the Bradley, BMP-2M, once you get inside within 100 meters, they are dog meat, and you will mop them up. So smoke to get in close. Now, if you get a chance to line up the shot and kill them before they can even aim at you, fine. But if you're not sure, if you think they're about to fire, send that smoke and push in close. All right, that's enough about ATGM rounds. Let's talk about heat rounds. We already talked about heat rounds in the previous guide, fighting other tanks with it. But let's talk about heat rounds for other purposes. Let's say you're fighting an IFV. If you use an AP round against IFVs, the damage that your AP rounds do is identical to what they do to tanks. Like if you're point blank, it's 800 damage, and you're going to pin them with an AP round no matter what. When you get into heat, it's strange because the damage values are different. I'm not sure the logic behind it. I think a lot of this had to do with how they wanted certain vehicles to die with a certain number of shots of heat round. But when you start dealing with the different IFVs, the heat rounds do different amounts of damage. Basically, it depends on how many hit points the IFV has. So, maybe you just want to shoot everything with AP and be done with it. And that's fine if you want to do it. Starting out, that may be the simplest way to think about things. But if you get to a point where you're wanting to conserve AP ammo and try and increase your endurance, lasting longer on the field without having to reload, I would encourage you to pay attention and use heat rounds. Work it into the mix here to efficiently kill vehicles and conserve those AP rounds where you can. So what does it look like to use to work heat into the lineup? Well, let's talk about all of the different scenarios. What are the things you're going to be fighting? First of all, you're going to be fighting other tanks. So when should I use anything other than AP? In my opinion, you shouldn't. You should always use AP. Keep it simple. Just shoot AP against tanks. Yeah, once you get out to longer ranges, you can consider heat or you can consider using an ATGM. I personally wouldn't. Keep it simple. Always shoot tanks with AP. There's just a lot of reasons to avoid using the others, including the increased risk of bouncing. With ATGMs, you've got the drift, and they kind of float and spin a little bit. They may not be nearly as accurate as you'd like. Just stick with AP for the tanks is my recommendation. What about when you're fighting other IFVs? Well, when you're fighting the high hit point ones, things like the Bradley, the Warrior, the AAVPs, which have like 2,000 hit points, or the Lav 6, which has 1,750, it's going to take 3 shots. 1 AP plus 2 heat is probably the most efficient way to instantly kill them. With the Lav 6, you can actually get it burning with just 2 heat shots if you want, if you remember that. But in general, just think 1 AP and 2 heat for those high hit point ones. In this particular example, I'm actually hitting the AAVP here through its layered armor, which is reducing the damage. So actually 3 shots doesn't instantly kill it. It does get it on burn though, and it pops soon thereafter. The vast bulk of IFVs will have 1,250 hit points. Every one of those can be killed with 1 AP shot and 1 heat shot if you want to mix that in. That will kill them outright. If you want, pretty much all of them can be set burning with 2 heat shots if you're really looking to conserve that AP. Now, they might get out and have a chance to repair it, right, and save the vehicle, so be warned of that. But if you're really looking to conserve, you could go 2 heat shot. When it comes to all of your light vehicles, they have either 650 or 750 hit points. A single heat round should either outright kill them or set them burning, and they burn pretty quick too. So again, if you're looking to conserve, just put 1 heat in it and be done. There's a couple of rare exceptions, like the Samir, for whatever reason, won't die to a single heat shot. It's a tough little thing, whereas Cobras and Tigers and everything else will. So there's probably a few exceptions out there to this, but the vast majority should die to 1 heat shot. One very important thing to note here with the M60T, it does not have heat. Don't make that mistake. It only has HE. HE is not the same as heat. HE will do much less damage to any kind of armored target, any kind of IFV. Don't use it. Just when you're on the M60T, just stay with AP with pretty much everything you're fighting, except for infantry. Then you switch over to the HE. All right, you're rolling through a FOB, you've got an enemy HAB, and you need to take it down. The best way to do that is 3 heat shots. Do not use your AP on the HABs. For whatever reason, it takes a lot more. It would take 7 AP shots to take the top off that HAB. Just put 3 heat in it to take the top off of it and get it disabled and be done. If we move on and talk about the radio, it's the exact opposite. When you're shooting radio, you want to use your AP if you're trying to use the fewest shots possible and get out of there. 4 AP shots to get the radio down. It's basically like killing a tank. 4 AP shots, right? You can do it with heat. It takes 6 if you're going to do that. You could also shoot it down with your command seat gun, but it's going to take 180 rounds. Given that some of the tanks only have 300, such as the T-72, I don't know that I'd be wasting that, and it takes a while to burn through that, but it is an option if that's all you've got. It will be pretty common that you've got to deal with an ATGM emplacement. They're pretty easy. It's dealer's choice. You can send 1 heat to completely destroy it. 1 AP would completely destroy it, or you can even let your command seat get in on the action. Have your command seat gunner who's whining that he doesn't have anything to shoot take care of it. It'll only take him 35 shots and keep him quiet. Shut up. Lastly, a very common thing you'll be shooting at will be helicopters. A single heat round or a single AP round will kill it, so it's kind of dealer's choice. If it's close and you've got time to reload, go for the heat shot and that's save the AP. But if it's long range, well, that AP is going to be better. It's not going to drop nearly as much. So again, it's kind of dealer's choice. Use your discretion. You can use either. Now, if you've noticed, nowhere in here have I said where ATGMs should be used, because a couple of the tanks do have ATGMs, like the T-72, T-90, the ZTZ, the M60. These things all have ATGMs. Where are we going to use those? In my opinion, you're not. They're just superfluous. I would not be using them in any of these scenarios. You might have a case for a moving helicopter at range, maybe, but even then, I'd rather be shooting the AP. Given the changes to ATGMs, how they're a little more squirrely, they're especially with the beam riders now, they're tougher to keep on target because of the small circle. Once it gets out at range, it's easy to lose those things. I would just rather take my chances with the AP shot, and there's literally no scenario I can think of where I would prefer an ATGM. Yeah, you've got a little argument when things get at super long range, maybe, but again, just with the inconsistencies of ATGMs right now, I wouldn't do it. But Gibson, you say, what about these white phosphorus smoke rounds that I see? Yes, the MGS and the Challenger have these cool white phosphorus rounds. Now, you would think that would be some of the cool stuff where you could go and shoot that into a crowd of infantry and they would start burning from the white phosphorus. That's what we were thinking it was going to be. But as it stands right now, they're just smoke. So they're not really useful, right? Wrong. Let's call it the smoke-a-dope strategy. What you can do with it is, if you can get a tank tracked, follow it up with a smoke round. If you get the smoke round right on that tank and it's tracked, it's done for. You've just ended the fight in 2 rounds. Reason being, you can now move. He can't see you. He can't shoot back at you. You can easily just have your driver move a little bit, and there's virtually no chance he's going to hit you while you mop up. But as long as you remember where he's at, he's dead. You're going to sit there and just pummel him. It's a neat little trick. Track him, smoke him, and then mop him up. Now we come to the turret speed, and the turret speed is very important. The obvious is that It's going to determine how quickly the gunner can turn that turret to get onto a target that the driver or the command seat are screaming about. But what's also important is this is what determines stabilization. A lot of people notice how horrible the stabilization is on some vehicles and how great it is in others. From what I can tell, this is directly correlated with turret speed. Now, stabilization in squad does not mean it's going to lock your crosshairs on a target. That's not what it is. Stabilization in squad simply means it's going to keep your turret on the same bearing and same elevation. That's it. So this is why, even though stabilization's turned on, as the tank's moving, you'll notice it kind of that your crosshairs kind of drift off of a target. Well, but if you'll pay attention, the bearing and the elevation are what it's maintaining. The problem comes when your turret simply can't turn fast enough to maintain that bearing, simply because your vehicle is spinning out or turning way too fast, faster than it can keep up with. And this gets more and more noticeable the slower your turret can turn. Once your vehicle stops turning, that turret will continue to try to get back to that bearing that it was originally on, and this is why it feels so wonky at times. So quickly looking at this, ranked from worst to first, of course you've got the worst being the T62 and the ZTD. You will notice even with stabilization on, things feel horrible because any amount of movement by the driver turning the vehicle can completely throw this off. You've got to turn very slow if you're trying not to disrupt your gunner. And likewise, down at the best, you've got the Challenger. It's the luxury car. It's got the same turret speed that IFVs have, which is crazy when you think about it. 7.5 seconds to do a full 360. That's the same speed as IFVs, except it's got this massive tank cannon up top. So very impressive. That's the luxury car out there. Abrams and Leopard are pretty solid. You can turn fast enough to throw these things off, but it's much less likely. And then you start getting into the dicey territory with the M60, the T72, and the ZTZ. The command seat gets no love. Let's talk about it for a second, especially the ones that have the nasty 50 caliber RWS turrets. The 50 cals that are on top of tanks can do nasty damage. In fact, you can actually kill IFVs faster using the 50 cal in conjunction with the main cannon rather than waiting for the second cannon shot. Now, most of the time, the command seat's better used for looking for other threats that are around you while you're dealing with the gunning. But if he's wanting to chip in on the damage, he absolutely can, and it can be nasty. And wow, this is already over 15 minutes long. There's so many topics to talk about on this kind of stuff. Little tips and tricks that I know have helped me, that other people have shown me. So hopefully some of this is of use to you guys. I appreciate you staying with me, and hope to see you guys out there running armor with me sometime. See you soon.